Where and how did you meet Burnum Burnum, man?
Yeah, Terania Creek, yeah. I went to a logging protest. Now, I didn't like protests. I didn't like being part of a group because being part of a group meant that you were responsible for the group's actions. And I liked being an individual, so I thought demonstrations weren't, you know. But Terry, my school teacher friend who I was living with, said to me, but the trees haven't got a voice. He said, you have to be a voice for the trees, you know, and make people aware of it. Chopping down trees that were older than white man's been here. So we had this great protest, and hundreds of hippies turned up, and we made our own camp and our own everything, you know, like running water, stoves, big kitchen to feed everybody. They even had a stone steam tent, and a kids' play area for all the kids that they wanted, and they'd have a big fenced off so the kids were safe and someone would look after the kids. They had women making sandwiches, going into the bush, feeding all the guys that were hiding amongst the trees and hassling the coppers and the loggers. And Burnum Burnum turned up, Aborigine. And he was sitting in our group and he was talking about how when he walked into pub, how white people made him felt in that, you know. And I stood up and said to him, well, they're not worth it, you know. I said, you know, I said, they're telling you what they're like, not what you're like. I said, you know, you're fine. I said, they're the ones that were the problem, you know. And he thanked me for that. And we'd sit and giggle. And in the end, out of all these hundreds of hippies, he took me aside and said, would you like to come with me on this environmental impact study I'm doing for the Rand government? They give us a brand new car and I want you to drive. So I become his driver, and that was when I experienced how the Aborigines are treated in outback Australia. They're put on reserves without water and running water or electricity, and they're actually treated like pigs. And when you go into the town's white people would say, we don't want these Aborigine cunts here, and they'd put them in one part of the pub, and that where they were allowed in the pub. If they even walked with me to the caravan park where I was staying, and the boss of the caravan park said, you cunts aren't coming in here, get out, you know, we don't want Aborigines here. So the Aborigines didn't care, they just turned around and walked off and didn't mind. But I walked into the pub with Burnum. Burnum had big, blonde, greyish beard and long grey silver hair, and was black as the ace of spades, full Aborigine. And I'd walk in with him, and I had long, blonde, curly hair, it was surfy, and walk into the Aborigine part of the pub with Burnum Burnum, and they'd point, and they'd say, who's that guy? And I'd say, well, I'm his white slave. I said, it's about time you black guys have one of us white cunts as a slave, eh? And they'd all go, what? You know, I'd never heard anything like it before, you know, but that was the sort of person I was. I liked, you know, saying the opposite of what people expected, and I was honest about myself and my heritage, you know. And Burnham had put his arm around me. He said, nah, he's my brother, you know. So I ended up sitting there drinking and having fun with all the black Aborigines. And then they'd pile into the Rand car and I'd drive them down this dirt road to the reservoir and drop them off for the night, you know. So that was a great experience to see how white man treats Aborigines in outback Australia. It's like little Sowetos and Johannesburgs everywhere, you know. This was in 1979. I hope it's improved, because even before that they used to have to get passes to leave the reserve. I don't know if you remember that, but they had blokes that ran it. And the blokes that ran the reserve would give them a ticket, a pass to be able to leave the reserve and go into town or whatever. And a lot of these guys abused the women and raped them and fucking did what they want with them to give them privileges and that, you know, they'd bribe them and shit. So white man has had a lot to answer for in his past, the way of Aboriginal treatment, you know. And Burnum Burnum's seen enough in me to know that I needed to know this and see it for myself. You know, he thought that I was one that was beneficiary for white man to see how they treated black man, because he knew that I wouldn't tolerate it, which I didn't. You know, I went back and I told people all about it and told people how the Aborigines were being treated, and I become very Indigenous, you know, pro-Indigenous, you know, thought a lot about the Aborigines and their fate and why they hated white man so much, and why it was passed on from parent to child about what white man did to them, was because nothing had really changed.
How long did you stay with Burnham and where did you go? What was he like?
I stayed with him for about 3 weeks, and we went to lots of places like Walgett, Lightning Ridge, right round back to Moree and things like that. And then we even went as far as Kingscliff North, and then he dropped me back at Byron and left. Well, about a month later, I'm at this moon dance and dancing, and I see Terry and Pam sitting just over from where we're all having a dance and listening to the bands and that. And right beside him was Burnum Burnum. So Burnum Burnum come up and introduced himself to the Hamills and said he was looking for me. So Terry and Burnum Burnum become really good friends too. So, you know, the introducing of friends was still going on, you know. It's fucking the hookups, you know, like Burnham meeting me and then getting to know Terry, and him and Terry become very close, you know, because they were both, one was a black guy and one was a white guy, but they both thought the same. Like one day we were sitting in Terry's house, and I said to Burnham, how do you feel that what white man's done to black man, you know, since white man's come here? And he said, do you know they're putting a wall around Australia to stop the surf coming in because there's too much surf? And I jumped up and said, what? They're not. They can't do that. And he said, do you see your reaction? I said, yeah. He said, that's how we feel. So that was, you know, he was a very, very smart man. And also at the logging protest, they had a day of introducing the Straits to why we were supporting the trees, and we had a come and check it out day, and about 2,000 Lismore people and people from all over around the area turned up, and we had to have parking areas and a big tent and a big place where we did speeches. Well, Burnum Burnum got up and had a speech, and he said, the Aborigine Bundjalung people have been in this area for 40,000 years, and we've only been here 200, you know. He said, do you imagine that? 40,000 years they've been here. And he said, is there any Bundjalung people in the crowd? And he said, I want you to stand up. 2 Aborigine people stood up, and everybody's hair on their head, the back of their neck just sort of lifted up, you know, you could feel it. You could feel this, ooh, you know, sort of vibe. That was how clever Burnham was. And everybody just started clapping these 2 Aborigines. which is sort of unheard of, you know what I mean? That was how clever the man was and how much fun he was to be around, because he had a lot of power in his words and his wisdom of getting to people and making them understand, you know, things like that.
What was the impact statement for? Did this statement make any impact changes?
He's doing an impact statement for Aborigines so the Rand government would see how they're being treated, I guess. Things run very slow in Parliament, don't they, you know, and actions and changes of laws and that. But I'm sure he made some ground, you know. I don't know what the ground was he made, but when we got to know him, I used to take him to places like Triple J, like people had seen him on TV and he was become real famous. He was even in a few movies. He was in a movie with John Jarrett, the guy out of Wolf Creek. He was his co-star. Well, I'd take him to Triple J and I'd turn up and they'd say, you got Burnum Burnum with you? And I'd say, yeah. And they'd say, oh, can we interview him? And they'd go and interview him, you know. They'd say, who are you? I'd say, I'm just his mate, you know. This white fucking guy with long hair. And fucking, we'd get in a taxi and we'd be going back and he'd say to this Chinese guy, you like my country? And the guy go, your country, my country? Yeah, I like. He said, no, it's not your country, it's my fucking country. Because he's completely Aborigine, you say. You know? The guy goes, this fucking Chinese guy, taxi driver. And I'd be pissing myself laughing because I knew, you know, what he was saying, you know. You like my country? It made me laugh, you know. So, you know, he's very entertaining too, very entertaining man. I loved him so much. Burnham passed. It's me, Johnny. I'm home.